Hey guys, so very good morning. Today we are going to discuss John chapter 19 verse 1 to 42. Subtopics we are going to discuss. So before starting our Bible study, we have to read this passage thoroughly for better understanding twice or thrice. Now we are discussing subtopics. First one, second Roman trial, verse 1 to 16. They mock Jesus and the crowd demands he be put to death. And third one, Pilate questions Jesus again. The crowd demands he be put to death. Pilate hands him over to be crucified. And verse 17 to 37, the crucifixion of Jesus. Jesus carries his cross to Golgotha. They nail him to the cross. The inscription is nailed over him. Various prophecies are fulfilled. They gamble for his clothes. Jesus asks John to take care of his mother, not prophecy. Jesus drinks the wine. Jesus gives up his spirit. Jesus avoids broken bones and is pierced with a spear. And verse 38 to for the burial of Jesus. Introduction. How is this the climax of the history of the world? You sometimes hear people talk about the climax of their life. Everything in their life was leading up to one point, preparing them and teaching them the lessons that they would need, and then it happens. Well, Jesus' death is the climax of the history of the world. From the early chapters of Genesis, hints about the coming Messiah can be seen. The Old Testament prepares the way for Christ, showing people the terrible problems of sin and the complete inadequacy of people or animal sacrifices to take it away. But mixed in the Old Testament are promises of hope, promises and shadows that one day someone will come to solve this problem for us. Someone to bless the whole world. Jesus' special birth and life create great excitement as to what will come next. It is far out of most people's expectations, but it has far-reaching influence. After this, even the rest of the New Testament looks back to it, interpreting what it means for us, challenging us to learn from it, to appreciate it, to live honorably because we are no longer slaves of sin. It shows how the news of Christ's death miraculously spreads through the world outside of the Bible. We know of the gospel going to India, to Africa, and some 100 years later. Millions of churches, hospitals, schools and orphanages have sprung up because of the cross. Millions of lives have been completely changed. Society and culture around the world have been shaped, many times even unaware, because of the cross. Without the cross and then the resurrection, this would not have happened. And we come down through history to each of us. Each of our lives has been shaped and changed forever because of this one event that took place almost 2000 years ago. When we were born, we had no idea it had ever happened, but it still would catch us. Not only has the world been forever changed, each of our life has been forever changed. The people pushing for it wanted to stop Jesus, not help him. The one who gave the verdict didn't want. The disciples were fearful of it, but it happened. It was God's plan to redeem the world and right to mistake of Adam. We can prepare some questions from this passage, and the first one is, what was the point of the thorns and ropes? And why would Pilate have Jesus killed although he knew there was no guilt in him? The third question we can prepare, why do you think was Pilate's view of the Jews? How did Pilate get back at the Jews for forcing his hand? And the next question, what was the main purpose of the design of the cross? How can you see the sovereignty of God throughout these verses? Why do you think Jesus would ask John to take care of his mother? And why not ask his brothers? And next one, what does this request show about Jesus' heart? What does it show about the need to care for parents? Next question, why would the soldiers give Jesus a drink when they clearly were trying to torture him? Next question we can prepare, what does the phrase "it is finished" mean? What does it mean to you that Jesus gave up his spirit? What else happened at the time of his death to show that it was not a normal death? So what else did Jesus say on the cross? So related to this topic, we can see different statements from different chapters. Jesus was scourged before he was crucified, Matthew chapter 27, and Simon helping to carry the cross and the wine with all gall mean to deaden the pain, and the thieves of the cross and more mocking of Jesus. Jesus dies and the accompanying signs, darkness, earthquake, temple will torn, etc. The trial before Herod, Barabbas was in prison for insurrection and murder. Jesus talks to the people following him to the crucifixion. Jesus asked the Father to forgive the people. Now we are going to discuss verse by verse. The verse 1 to 16, the second Roman trial. The trial before Herod, Jesus was scourged before he was crucified. Barabbas was in prison for insurrection and murder. The Romans trial here by Pilate is marked by four primary things. The first one is Jesus was continually mocked and ridiculed. And the second one is Pilate knew he was innocent and was reluctant to go along with crucifixion. The third one is the Jews refused to give in to any lesser punishment. Fourth one is Jesus refused to vigorously defend himself. This passage makes it clear that Jesus was not guilty. He had done nothing worthy of death. Even a pagan leader acknowledged this. Pilate was not deceived or tricked into thinking that Jesus was guilty. He knew Jesus was not. God was the one who gave the authority to Pilate, and the ones who handed Jesus to him were more guilty. This, however, doesn't mean Pilate was not guilty for sending Jesus to crucifixion. He was still a moral agent and as a leader obligated to do what was right. The Jews came up with an ingenious argument to convince Pilate. They appealed to his ties with Caesar and challenged his loyalty and patriotism. Pilate had already made some severe mistakes in Judea, and Tiberius Caesar was known as cruel and quick to punish. The Jews were threatening further trouble that could signal the end of Pilate's power there in Judea. This was the clenching argument that finally caused Pilate to give the verdict. At the end, he asked them again what they want, perhaps in yet another attempt to show he was not responsible. Pilate was in a tough situation with a huge crowd of angry and malicious people working together to force him to do this. Like most people would have done, he finally gave in. This was about 6 in the morning, and it was the day before the Passover. At this time, many Passover lambs would have been being prepared. Is it any coincidence that Jesus died so close to the Passover? I think not. Now we are going to discuss Jesus' crucifixion, verse 17 to 37. We can prepare some questions from this for our Bible study from this passage. The first one: how did Pilate get back at the Jews for forcing his hand? The second question: what was the main purpose for the design for the cross? The third question we can prepare: how can you see the sovereignty of God throughout the verses? So now we are going to discuss verse by verse. Related to this passage, we have some statements from different chapters. Simon helping to carry the cross and the wine with gall mean to deaden the pain, right? So Jesus was already beaten and tortured and whipped and bleeding, and then had to carry his own cross for a waste because he was so exhausted, in no shape to do. They forced Simon of Cyrene to do it, who was perhaps in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. Although Jesus was in the terrible state, he still was reaching out to the crowds around him with compassion, thinking of the misery that they themselves would face later. Some people attempted to give him wine with gall, which was likely to deaden the pain of the crucifixion. He wouldn't drink in order to have his full mental capacity for what lay ahead, much like we'll see. Crucifixion was designed to be as painful as possible. Nails would be driven through the wrist and through the 2 feet. The person would be left baking in the sun. These wouldn't be enough to kill the person, but would be excruciating pain. Sometimes a piece of wood would be nailed below their feet so they could be put part of their weight on it. This wouldn't be to lessen pain, but would be to prolong their life and thus their pain. To breathe, one would have to hold themselves up with their arms and feet, putting a lot of pressure on their wounds. Dehydration would set in. Muscle spasms would rack the body, and what is more, this would be done in front of all to see, increasing one's shame and disgrace. This was not just a way to kill people, it was a perfected art for exacting as much pain as possible before death. The movies and pictures that depict a kind of lovely and gentle sin are ridiculous. It was brutal, bloody and violent. Sin is a really ugly and serious thing. There is no pleasant or easy way to deal with it. Pilate showed again his contempt for the Jews by getting back at them by putting this placard of Jesus above the cross. It was a kind of way of making fun of the Jews for having such a pathetic king. When the Jews complained, Pilate refused to give in. He had enough. Next comes 2 sections surrounding Jesus' request to John relating to the prophecies. We can see divided clothes, cast lots, the drink, no broken bones, and pierced. We have some statements, right? Most of these prophecies were fulfilled by Romans who didn't even know them. They were simply being greedy or doing their job, and in the process were providing God's word spoken hundreds of years before God is completely sovereign. Jesus asked John to take care of his mother. This tells us several likely things. Joseph was probably dead already. His brothers still hadn't believed in him, and it was still important to Jesus to honor his parents. His mother who was left. Jesus came for such a high and noble purpose, to die for the world. And even in that, he still was remembering his duty to take care of his mother and make sure this was performed adequately. When you look at Mark chapter 7 verse 11, as believers we are obligated to make sure our parents are taken care of. Even at this point, Jesus is concerned for others, not himself. The wine is likely given to Jesus as a calculated attempt to prolong his life and suffering, not out of mercy. It is finished is a reference to the completed work of the cross. Jesus came for one major purpose. He had a mission and a goal, seen again and again in the book of John. Now it was finally finished. It was finished once for all. It need never be repeated. He had done God's will and done it perfectly. In verse 30 it says, gave up his spirit. What does that mean? I believe that even at this point, Jesus' life was not simply taken from him, but he gave it up himself. He laid down his life voluntarily as a sacrifice. As a son of God, I guess he could have stayed hanging on the cross forever if he desired. God made it clear that Jesus' death was not ordinary. Even a pagan, they believed in Jesus because of all of the amazing things that happened right at that moment. Darkness, earthquake, saints arising, temple wheel torn, etc. What is the significance of the wheel being torn from top to bottom? The Romans normally left their victims on the cross for days to first die and then start rotting and be eaten alive. But this would have violated the Sabbath and violated the custom set down by Moses not to leave a person overnight. So in this case, the Romans broke their legs to kill them. Jesus was already dead, and the piercing proved it beyond a doubt. It is really interesting that God already let a lot of things happen to disprove later theories that would come out, such as the swoon theory. Finally, Jesus was buried, proving again he hadn't just fainted. Joseph and Nicodemus take initiative to help with the burial. Buried with a rich man, Isaiah chapter 53 verse 9. What did Jesus have to die? Why did Jesus have to die? What precedents can we find in the Old Testament for sacrifice for sin? Why do you think God decided on such an ugly and even sick from to take away sin? Scripture says that Jesus gave his life a ransom for many. Who is the ransom to? What do you think was the painful aspect for Jesus of dying on the cross? In what way is this the climax of God's plan for the world? Why is Jesus' death complete and permanent whereas animal sacrifice are not? In what way is Jerusalem similar to Adam? In what way is Jesus similar to Adam? What lessons can we learn from Jesus' death? How should this inspire us? Why should we emphasize the cross when sharing the gospel? Related to this passage, we have a different statements and from different topics. The first prophecy of Christ's death, Genesis chapter 3 verse 15, the first sacrifice, Genesis chapter 3 verse 21, and Genesis chapter 12 verse 3. In Abraham, through Jesus, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Isaiah chapter 53, clear prophecies about Jesus' suffering, and Psalm 22 prophecy about Jesus' clothes being divided, and Psalm 34 prophecy about Jesus' bones not being broken. Zechariah chapter 12 verse 10, look on him whom they have pierced. And Romans chapter 5 verse 12, through one man sin came into the world, and through one man justification resulted in life. And it was God's love, John chapter 3 verse 16. Jesus, the lamb without blemish and spot, dying, his blood shed for us. Jesus was made sin for us. The cross was a shame and disgrace. One may almost say, without shedding of blood there is no forgiveness. And moral influence, ransom, satisfaction brings back the honor to God that is due him. Substitution, Daniel chapter 9 verse 24, reconciliation, the change from enmity to peace, bringing a hostile world to himself through Christ's death. And Colossians chapter 1 verse 20, redemption, the payment of Jesus' death, purchasing us out of the slave market of sin. Ephesians chapter 1 verse 7, justification, a legal term related to the idea of acquittal. So I hope you can understand this Bible study. We'll meet in our next Bible study. God bless you. Thank you.